most people, a lot of us don't even know what our purpose is, like our true calling. And I think that if you are placing or trying to place a lot of importance on your job being intimately tied to something that you're passionate about, I think that that runs the risk of placing an unreasonable responsibility on your 9 to 5. Hi guys, welcome back to my channel and welcome back to another video. My name is Yanga if you are seeing my face for the first time, and in this video I want to chat about certain pieces of advice that I have received either directly or just advice that's generally very popular with regards to one's journey to qualifying as a CASA or just generally career type of advice. And this is a video relating to advice that I did not take, and I'm pretty glad that I did not take. So I think it will be invaluable to someone who is also trying to sift through the noise. Of course, this is purely my opinion and I could be wrong, and advice that I have decided not to take might actually be advice that you should be taking. So anything that I do say in this video is purely my opinion, so take it with a pinch of salt, but I do hope that you guys enjoy it. And of course, if you do, please don't forget to like the video. So let's get straight into it. Okay, so one thing I do have on my lap is my notepad because I don't want to get derailed and forget the points that I want to mention. But the first piece of advice that I decided to ignore is one that essentially says that money should be enough of a sole consideration to take up a role. And I think the operative term here is sole consideration. Of course, money is very, very important when you are thinking about which job opportunity to take on. But I am of the opinion that money can never and should never be the sole consideration when you are thinking about a specific role that you want to take on. And there are a number of reasons why I feel like this is a dangerous piece of advice. But more than anything, number one, if you make money your sole sort of consideration in every single role, you're never really going to be satisfied in whatever job that you decide to take, because there's always going to be a role that's going to offer you more money. What I believe is you need to try, especially in the infancy of your career, so right at the beginning stages of you trying to build your skill set, trying to be someone who is, growing in their career, what you want to emphasize is really, how can I bring value into any organization that I'm in? And once you start focusing on what you can bring into a team, what you can bring into the marketplace, you'll find that the money will be chasing you down. So that for me is the first piece of advice that I decided to ignore, to say that, you know what, I can see this job opportunities coming through, but there's other things that you need to take into consideration, and that in and of itself can be a completely separate video, because we could really go on and on that specific point. The second piece of career advice that I think is pretty popular, and I understand why it would be popular, but that is, you need to avoid working for a small company or a medium-sized company, and you just need to try and focus on working for a company that is your blue chip, your big organization. The reason why I don't necessarily agree with this piece of information is because I have had the luxury of experiencing both sides of this coin. I have worked for a relatively, I'll say medium-sized, maybe not small, but medium in comparison to your larger corporates. So not necessarily a household name, but I want to say that don't necessarily not take up a job offer because it's not a known company or it's a small company. And the reason why I say that is because a small company does have certain benefits or certain characteristics that it can offer you that you won't easily find in a larger organization. One of those things is the fact that you are actually able to do a whole host of things that you may not necessarily be able to do in a larger organization. And what I've experienced in a more smaller company is you're actually able to get a lot more of a hands-on type of experience in different types of, whether it's projects or whatever the case may be, and maybe even getting involved in the more strategic end of things, which is things that really talk to me, and things that can really improve you overall as a person, because you're getting exposure to certain types of things that you may not necessarily get exposure earlier on in your career if you are working for a more larger organization. I don't think it's reason enough to say that I'm not going to work for organization X because organization X is a small company that no one knows. You want to consider all sorts of factors. Who is at the helm of this specific company? What's their experience? What exposure am I going to get when I work in this company? What skills am I going to learn? What sector is this? Is this a sector that I want to be in? Because maybe this is going to be your inroad into being in that sector long term. So that's definitely something that I'd say is advice that you can put on the back burner. The next piece of advice that I decided to not take, and I'm glad that I did not take this advice, is you should not job hop because it's going to make your CV look bad. And I understand again why this would be very popular advice, but I would say that if it's time to change jobs, go from one role to the next, you need to always be open to that possibility of change, because obviously your needs are going to be changing, your interests are going to be changing, your goals might also be changing. And sometimes an organization that aligned with our goals 2 years ago, 3 years ago, may not necessarily align with our goals where we are at that specific point in time. And you cannot have the fear of how this is going to look on your CV be the sole consideration of why you're not going to take on the next opportunity. I've seen people who started a job today, and at the end of their month, they were starting to, basically move on to the next role because that perfect opportunity that they were looking for finally popped up. But if you have the mentality that, what is my next employer going to say? You're putting yourself in a position to say no to opportunities because you're afraid of how it's going to look in your CV. I believe that if you are able to talk to a specific decision relating to your career trajectory, then you shouldn't be afraid of making that specific jump, if it makes sense. The next piece of advice is a bit controversial, but I'm going to say it anyway. And that is essentially that your job needs to be your purpose, or it needs to be your passion. So I want to say that to a large degree, I do actually agree with this advice. I've just not necessarily taken it. Okay. And I think if you are someone who's fortunate enough to be in that position, you are living your purpose. A lot of athletes are people who are living their purpose, and they absolutely have a passion for what they do. That's why they're able to play at a professional level. But for most people, a lot of us don't even know what our purpose is, like our true calling. And I think that if you are placing or trying to place a lot of importance on your job being intimately tied to something that you're passionate about, I think that runs the risk of placing an unreasonable responsibility on your 9 to 5. A book that really talked to this point quite nicely is a book by an author named Cal Newport, and the book is titled So Good They Can't Ignore You. And the theme of the book really emphasizes this well, because it says you need to essentially focus on competence and being good at what you do, and you'll find that the passion will follow the competence, because it's very difficult to not enjoy something that you are now very good at. But I think a lot of people try to get it the other way around, where you want the passion to be something that the job gives you, and then you're going to work on being good at that specific thing. Another thing that I will say on this specific point is that if you're someone who's multifaceted, so you have a lot of passions, which is something that I am, you can have your job and honor your job and gain skills that the job allows you to gain, and pursue your passions on the side. Sometimes you're able to marry the two, which is great, But there are other ways of going about finding your purpose and your passion, and it doesn't always have to be tied to your job. And I think if you have a bit more of an open-mindedness, then working a 9 to 5 becomes less burdensome, because you're not going there trying to be passionate about spreadsheets, trying to be passionate about, forecasting and doing valuations. You're just there to learn, to make sure that at least you're being stretched intellectually and being compensated accordingly. Um, and then on the side, you're also doing things that spark your passion. I think I'm a prime example of this. I'm obviously, if you haven't noticed, I love communicating ideas and sharing my thoughts and speaking. And that's where YouTube comes in quite nicely as a creative outlet for me. But if I expected my job to really give me a creative outlet all the time, I'd probably be very frustrated. So that's something that I would say it's okay to ignore advice that says you need to be extremely passionate about your day job. There are other ways to find a way to satisfy your need to indulge in your passions, while also keeping a day job that may not necessarily spark your passion. The last piece of advice that I don't ascribe to is that where there is a shortcut, you need to take it. The only shortcut, if we want to call it that I believe in, is networking, and leveraging off of the people in your networks. Outside of that, you're not trying to take shortcuts, or you should not be taking shortcuts, because shortcuts have a way of blowing up in your face and cutting your career short, or cutting your journey short. And the fundamental principle here is you always want to be a person of integrity. Now, this is not advice that was given to me directly, but sometimes you'll overhear conversations and you'll think to yourself, how does one consider acting in a way that is not really ethical, but they're trying to pursue a career that is entrenched in ethical values? So if you are, for example, wanting to qualify as a CA, you want to be a very ethical person. You want integrity to be the cornerstone of what drives your decisions. Obviously, that doesn't just talk to someone who's trying to be a CA. That's across the board. If there's one piece of career advice that for me I think is very, very dangerous, is career advice that alludes to, hey, it's okay if you take a shortcut here and there, especially with what happened with COVID and the examinations having to take a different type of format where you could write remotely, and therefore no one is really watching you. Yes, there are apps that try to have that exam taking place in a controlled environment, but sometimes people try and take shortcuts and try to take advantage of those type of situations. And I would say that you never ever want to be that person who takes shortcuts in life, because once you start engaging in that type of behavior, it becomes a habit and it catches up with you. You just don't want to be someone who does not have integrity. So yeah, that is essentially some of the pieces of advice that I decided to not adhere to, and I'm glad that I did not adhere to. I have no regrets about that. I'll probably also chat in a different video about career advice that has made all the difference in my life, that I'm glad I took. And so I hope you guys will also enjoy that video. Of course, I'm glad that you guys stayed and watched until the end. Thank you so much for your continuous support, and as well as everyone else who has subscribed more recently to the channel. I really appreciate the support, and I'll see you guys in my next video.